Mr. Ratcliffe.
Thank the chairman, and Ambassador Yovanovitch. I'd like to join all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in thanking you for your service. I'd like to ask you about your earlier testimony about your Senate confirmation, and Congresswoman Stefanik had asked you how the Obama-Biden State Department had prepared you to answer questions about Burisma and Hunter Biden specifically. You recall that?
Yes.
And
yes.
She mentioned that you had been asked or been prepared for a question about Hunter Biden's role on the board of Burisma, but I don't think that you gave us the answer or answers that the Obama-Biden State Department prepared you to give in response to that question. Do you remember what those answers were?
Yeah. It was something along the lines of, I would refer you to the Vice President's office on that.
So did they, in the course of that, brief you about the amount of money that Hunter Biden was being paid by Burisma?
No, this wasn't part of a briefing. I mean, I had sort of big old books with questions that might come up.
In preparation for your confirmation. And they thought that Hunter Biden's role at Burisma might be significant enough that it would come up during your confirmation. Is that correct?
Apparently so. I mean, there were hundreds of questions.
Well, hundreds of questions, but were there hundreds of companies? How many companies other than Burisma did the Obama-Biden State Department prepare you to give answers for? And if so, if there were others, which ones?
I just don't recall.
You don't recall that there were any other companies, is that correct?
I'm quite sure there probably were some companies, but I mean, you know, this is a while ago and I don't recall.
But you specifically recall Burisma?
Yes.
All right. Out of thousands of companies in the Ukraine, the only one that you recall the Obama-Biden State Department preparing you to answer questions about was the one where the Vice President's son was on the board. Is that fair?
Yes.
You understood from Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent's testimony, as it's been related to you, that he testified a few days ago. Do you understand that that arrangement, Hunter Biden's role on the Burisma board, caused him enough concern that, as he testified in his statement, that in February of 2015, I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member could create the perception of a conflict of interest. He went on to talk about the Vice President's responsibilities over the Ukrainian policy as one of those factors. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
That it was a legitimate concern to raise?
I think that it could raise the appearance of a conflict of interest.
And did you discuss that ever with Mr. Kent?
I don't believe so.
Shortly before your confirmation in August of 2016, Prosecutor General Shokin was fired by President Poroshenko, correct?
Yes.
And Prosecutor General Shokin was the one who had opened the investigation into Burisma, correct?
I think that's right, but I'm not actually sure.
He was in charge of it, at least at that point in time, as the Prosecutor General. Mm-hmm. And are you aware of the very public statements by the Vice President that firing of the Prosecutor General occurred in March of 2016, 6 hours after the Vice President told President Poroshenko that he needed to fire the Prosecutor General or that he wouldn't receive $1 billion from the United States? Do you recall that?
Yes.
All right. And do you think that raises a potential concern or conflict of interest that the Vice President of the United States was ordering the firing of the prosecutor in charge of a company that has been identified as one that is substantially corrupt?
I actually don't. I don't think that the view that Mr. Shokin was not a good prosecutor general fighting corruption, I don't think that had anything to do with the Burisma case.
But the legitimate concern about Hunter Biden's role was legitimate, correct?
I think it creates a concern that there could be an appearance of
Well, based on your
conflict of interest.
testimony, Ambassador, I'd like to renew my request, Mr. Chairman, that Hunter Biden's testimony that has been
Time of the
requested,
gentleman has expired.
requested by the Republicans be considered
The gentleman has expired.
as
Mr.
legitimate
Heck,
rather than as a sham, as the
Gentleman will
has been
suspend.
referred to
Gentleman will
by the
suspend.
chairman.
Your time has
I
expired.
have a unanimous.
Mr. Heck,
I have a
you are
unanimous
recognized.
consent request.
You're not recognized. Mr. Heck, you are.